You're looking for a welder that won't sit in a closet gathering dust, that you can actually bring to a job site or a weekend garage project without spending a fortune, and that won't make you spend an hour just figuring out which knob does what. That hesitation you feel wondering if you'll end up with a machine that's either too flimsy for serious work or too complex for a hobbyist has been there for a lot of people who finally decide to buy a multi-process welder. I've been digging through forums, watching a handful of build shop videos, and reading the specs that Miller makes public, so I can give you a picture of what living with the Multimatic 220 is really like before you click Add to Cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest promise Miller makes with the Multimatic 220 is that it's an all-in-one machine. You get MIG, Flux-Cored, and TG capability from a single unit, plus a MIG gun, a TG torch, and a dual-voltage plug that lets you run off either 120V or 240V. For a lot of buyers, that's the hook because it eliminates the need to buy 3 separate welders and 3 separate power cords. In practice, that translates to a smaller footprint in a cramped shop and fewer spare parts to keep track of. If you're a mobile fabricator who shows up to a client's site and only has a 120-volt outlet, you can still run the machine. If you later move to a workshop with a 240-volt service, you just swap the plug and you're good to go. Now, who actually benefits from this flexibility? If you're a serious hobbyist who likes to dabble in everything from building a backyard table with MIG to repairing a thin stainless steel bike frame with TIG, the Multimatic 220 feels like a natural fit. The included torch and gun are sized for the machine, so you're not forced to hunt down a third-party accessory that might not line up with the control layout. For a small business that does a mix of automotive work, small-scale fabrication, and occasional artistic metalwork, the ability to switch processes without swapping out the whole unit can save both time and floor space. On the flip side, if you're a professional welder whose daily grind is high-amperage MIG on thick plate steel, you might find the 220's output a bit limiting. The machine is designed for versatility, not for the kind of deep draw, high-current runs you see in heavy-duty shipbuilding or structural steelwork. Likewise, if you're only interested in one process, say, you've already committed to a dedicated TG setup for fine jewelry, spending extra on a multi-process unit could feel like overkill. In those scenarios, a single-process machine that's optimized for that one task often offers better fine-tuning and a lower price point. Let's talk about the real-world experience of setting it up. The first thing most users notice is how Miller has tried to make the control panel intuitive. There are dedicated knobs for wire feed speed, voltage, and a selector switch for the process. The layout mirrors what you'd find on a dedicated MIG or TG, which means you don't have to learn a completely new interface if you already know one of the processes. The plug on the back is a quick-change design. You pull a latch, swap the 120V cord for the 240V cord, and the machine recognizes the change without a reboot. That's a small convenience, but it matters when you're pulling up a job that suddenly needs the higher voltage for thicker material. The actual welding performance feels consistent with Miller's reputation for precise arc control. When you fire up MIG on mild steel, the wire feeds smoothly and the voltage holds steady, which means you spend less time hunting for a clean bead. Switching to Flux-Cored is essentially the same routine. You just change the consumable, and the machine adjusts the parameters automatically based on the dial positions. For TG, the torch's foot pedal is separate but integrates nicely with the main unit, giving you the fine current control needed for thin aluminum or stainless. In a typical weekend project, say, building a custom metal bike rack, you can start with MIG to cut the main tubing, then drop to TG to clean up the joints and add a polished finish, all without unplugging the machine or pulling out a second welder. One practical weakness shows up when you try to push the machine to its limits. The 220 is rated for a maximum output that sits comfortably in the 200 amp range, which is plenty for most DIY and small shop tasks, but can feel cramped if you try to weld very thick plate in a single pass. You'll notice you need to go slower, perhaps at a second pass, which isn't a deal breaker but does extend the time on a job that could be done in half an hour with a more beefy unit. Another nuance is the weight. At around 60 pounds, it's portable compared to a full-size industrial welder, but it's not something you'll want to lug up a flight of stairs every